back to the channel. As you can see in the title, this is my review of the Dark Tower series by Stephen King. And this will include a tiny mini review of the Dark Tower, the 7th book in the series, and the last one that I just finished a couple days ago. As many people probably heard, the ending of the series is very divisive, to say the least. Many people love it, many people hate it, and you'll hear my thoughts in this review. But yeah, let's just start off with a review of this book. A lot of things happen in this almost 800-page book. It's one of the thickest, and I don't know yet if it's my favorite yet. Obviously, I've only finished it for a couple days, and after thinking, I don't think it's my favorite. I think it's honestly near like the middle of the list. It's not the best. It's not the worst. It's right in the middle. I find a lot of things are amazing about this book, and a lot of things I just didn't really care for. A lot of things happen, and overall this book is very emotional, funny, and interesting, trippy. Like it's a packed full book, full of honestly a lot of world building, considering it's the last book in the series, and it's the book where you finally get to the Dark Tower. And the ending was kind of anticlimactic. There's a lot of sad things that happen in this book, so get ready to be disappointed. Not disappointed in the book, but disappointed in the events that happen in the book. Yeah, I really liked it. The ending, spoiler free. I personally, after thinking about it for a couple of days, I enjoyed the ending. I think it was very Stephen King-esque, and it's something that I could have probably predicted if you gave me enough time. Just considering how weird this whole series is. Yeah, that's my review of the book. I thought it's in the middle. It's not the best. It's not the worst. The writing was good. Very, very sad book, but also really interesting. And yeah, it was good. I mean, it wasn't the best. It wasn't the worst. And yeah, now I guess I'll go into the series review. I guess I'll say my favorite, my least favorite. But we'll start from the beginning. We'll start from the very beginning, The Gunslinger. This book I read in January of 2021, almost a year and 8 months ago, and I honestly still remember a lot of this book. Many people say it wasn't that good, but I remember, this was one of my first ever videos with that high-pitched voice, and if I reread it, I probably won't love it as much. Because I'll probably see what other people see bad about it. But my first reading, I quite liked it. And I wasn't really big into, like, a high fantasy. I think the only fantasy I read before that was Lord of the Rings. And then I read, like, Way of Kings and Mistborn all after this. I liked it because it's probably my first entry pretty much into high fantasy, and it's really short, and many people say it's a prologue to the whole series, and I think that is true before you get into the Drawing of the Three, which, again, I read this in February, or I think the last half of January or something, of 2021, and I love this book. This book was an obvious step up from The Gunslinger, and that's saying something because I quite liked The Gunslinger back then. And I'm saying that because I haven't read it, and I haven't read it in a year and a bit, so I'll probably do a reread, probably 2023. I really want to reread the series, and as you can tell, I read this book in January 2021, and I just finished this one a couple days ago, so it did take, I did span it out like almost 2 years, or a year and a half, so I really want to read it like more crunched together, not read it over so long. This book, Drawing of the Three, I absolutely loved. This book is split into 3 parts, and obviously you can see 3 doors on the cover, and essentially Roland, the main character, is starting to form his little group, his quartet that they call it in the book, to go to the tower, as you can see in the last book right there. And each door is a person's life that he's going into the real world, Earth. This is not Earth, but goes into Earth. And he's just forming his quartet. And I love it because each story, each part of the book is kind of like a short story, honestly. Each one, this book is not really long, I don't think. It's 450. And each part is only 150 pages, I think. And it's just a short story of Roland finding a person and you learn their life story and stuff like that. So I found this one very interesting, and I love this one, and the short story format was just what I needed in that time. So that one I really enjoyed. The next one is Wastelands. Many people think this is their favorite in the series, and I would probably have to agree with that. These two are pretty much tied for me. This one I really enjoy. The ending is a big cliffhanger. Thank God I had the 4th book on hand. But this one ends with a big cliffhanger. This story I probably will have to read because, funny enough, I don't really remember this one that much as Drawing a 3 and Gunslinger. This one, I mainly only remember the last 100 pages. I just found the middle chunk not as exciting, but the start and I love. Next is Wizard and Glass, the 4th book in the series. And I probably would have to say this one is my favorite of the series. After finishing the series for my first time, obviously. I'll have to probably reread it to make a final decision, and I'll probably have to reread it closer together. These two I read in January of 2021. Then I skipped like the whole summer and read this one, I think in October, November of 2021. Then I read this one in November, December 2021, and then I read these two in December, January, I'm pretty sure. So, yeah, it took me a long time to get to the last book. But this one I think is my favorite or second favorite after these two, because I think these are tied for me. So these two are probably tied for second or first, and this one's first or second. These 3 books are probably the best in the series, honestly, in my opinion. This one is, I don't want to spoil anything, but it's essentially Roland telling his whole backstory. The main character, Roland, and he's a gunslinger, and it's him telling his whole story, essentially, or his whole a mini story in his life. So you kind of go away from the whole quartet and the Dark Tower, and you just focus on this tiny year, I think, part in Roland's life. And I found it very interesting. It was a romance, if you like that, but I'm not big on romance. You guys know that. And I found it very interesting. It's more than romance, and I quite liked it. The next book is Wolves of the Kala, the 5th book in the Dark Tower series. This one is probably near the bottom of the list, honestly. I just found the ending to be very, very, not anticlimactic, but very quick. The whole story is essentially the quartet kind of protecting this town that they go across on their way to the Dark Tower. And they essentially train them, and just the whole book is just them helping them and getting them ready for bad things to come to the town. Yeah, so this book is about the quartet protecting this town. I can't really say more than that. I just found the payoff very light, considering how much information and how long it took. But yeah, that is probably near the bottom of the list. And Song of Susanna is probably around the middle with the Dark Tower. I found that it was very much a bridge story between Wolves of the Kala and the Dark Tower right here. It was very much a bridge story. You could probably split this book in half and put the second half in the Dark Tower and the first half in the Wolves of the Kala. Just how much didn't happen, honestly. Not a lot happened. And yeah, it was just a bridge from going from Wolves of the Kala to the Dark Tower, just to make it smoother. It's very short. I think it's only around 400 pages, and it's the shortest one since, I think, Drawing the 3. So there's not much to say. I don't want to spoil. A lot of interesting happens, but not a lot happens, if that makes sense. And lastly, I talked about this at the start of the video, the Dark Tower. I told you this was middle of the pack, and if I had to rate them, it would probably be something like this. Obviously this is subject to change. I read these 3 almost like a year and a half, 2 years ago, so these I don't really remember as much as the Dark Tower and Wolves of Kala and Song of Susanna. So yeah, but this is probably my rough rating. Wolves of Kala is probably definitely my favorite. Dark Tower and Gunslinger are middle of the pack. Song of Susanna is not the worst, but not the best. And Wizard, Glass, Wastelands, and Drawing 3 are most definitely the best in the series. Not just in my opinion, but I've seen a lot of people that these 3, especially Wastelands and Drawing 3, are the best in the series. So you just have to, if you don't like the Gunslinger, you just have to truck through it, and then to get to drawing 3, you get to most people's favorite. Not necessarily saying that you'll love it, but most people like it. And the last thing I want to talk about in this video is The Wind Through the Keyhole. Many people say you're supposed to read it between books 4 and 5, I'm pretty sure. I think that's in between here and here. So right in between here. Because it takes place during this part. Because there's a little chunk at the end of Wizard Glass and the start of Wolves of the Kala. I decided not to read it. I think it's just because I searched it up and I saw a Reddit forum saying you shouldn't read it. So I just skipped it. Plus, if Stephen King wrote it that way, then I probably just read as many other Dark Tower fans read it after the whole series was finished. I just thought that was the best way. So I will be reading this very, very soon. I'm excited to read it, and it's my last little chunk of the Dark Tower that I get. Very excited to read that. Honestly, I probably should have read it before the Dark Tower to make sure that this is like the end. This is the end to the whole series, but I'm glad I just left this 300 short kind of story, considering how big these other books are, just to read. So when I have a craving for the Dark Tower, I'll get to read it. And a couple things. I ordered this book called The Dark Tower Concordance, I think it was called. I'll put a photo on the screen right there. And very excited to read that. I might have a mini review of that. I don't think it's kind of like a book you read. I think it's like an encyclopedia. People say don't get it if you haven't read the series, because I think it spoils a lot of things, but I'm excited to read it because it explains, I think it's like the Wheel of Time companion, something like that, where it explains all the characters, life stories, and maps, and just history of all the Dark Tower. And yeah, so I'm excited to read that, excited to read this, and excited to read Fairy Tale on September 6th by Stephen King. I definitely will be getting that the first day, and probably having a review a couple days after. Very excited to that, because I read recently, if you watch my Goodreads, I recently read Eyes of the Dragon to get ready for Fairy Tale. Fairy Tale, the synopsis sounds very much like Eyes of the Dragon, so I read Eyes of the Dragon, and just quick thoughts, I thought it was pretty good. It was a good short kind of story. It was for younger ages, for like YA, I think, around there. It's definitely not like a middle grade, because it has some dark stuff in it, but it was decent. I mean, it was a nice short story that I read, and yeah, so I really wanted to finish the Dark Tower series and Eyes of the Dragon before I read Fairy Tale, because I'm just worried that Stephen King has very much been catering towards the constant readers in his most recent books, having like hints and Easter eggs, and I mean, if you don't get the Easter eggs, then I mean, there's a point to reading it, but when I read a Stephen King book, I want to get all the references. So, yeah, I'm excited to read Fairy Tale. So, yeah, thanks for listening. This has been my Dark Tower series review, Dark Tower Book 7 review, and just some quick Dark Tower things to mention. I'm glad I finished it. If you have not read the series, please read it as soon as possible. It's honestly an amazing series, and I just wanted to note quickly that it's fantasy, but it's also a lot of genres at the same time. Gunslinger is definitely a Western fantasy kind of series, or book, I mean. It has fantasy elements, but it's called The Gunslinger, and it's a lot of Western kind of stuff. Drawing a 3 is like a portal fantasy. Like I explained it earlier, jumping through doors and going to people's worlds. The Wastelands, I would say, is probably the most fantasy that there is. Probably darker fantasy, hence the name. Like I said, Wizard Glass is primarily a romance, but obviously there's fantasy elements throughout the whole series. That's why it's called the fantasy series. Wolves of the Kala, it'd be hard. It'd probably be sci-fi, honestly. With these two, Song of Susanna and Wolves of the Kala, he really leaned into the sci-fi and the sci-fantasy kind of genre. And the last book, I think it ends the same way it starts. I think it's a fantasy Western kind of story, this one. And yeah, so if you're not a big fan of fantasy, I would still recommend it, because there's just so much genres, and it's Stephen King's magnum opus, and it's a great story as that. So if you have not read it, I would read it. At least try the first 2 books. They're short. I think combined they're around 500 pages. So it's not a huge commitment, but at least read the second book, because I find the second book is definitely my favorite. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.